Brian Lilly wrote an article today saying that even though he's talking about it, he's just trying to calm the people down that want the schools opened. But he's not having to leave the schools open.
He's doing that because he wants the business to come in.
Yeah. Good morning, Vency, and the sports teams. Okay, so let's do the Heilige Gemara. We are up to Daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph for 4 lines from the top. Today's broadcast is being sponsored by Rabbi Yisrael Lewis, Le'ilu Nishmas, his mother, who Allah Shalom, whose Yorta was yesterday, which was Chaf Aleph Sivan, this Chaf Beis, and her name was Chayisar Bas Rabdoib Allah Shalom, and we remember her as Mrs. Edith Lewis or Mrs. Eluish, or as Rabbi Mudal used to say, our secretary in our school is so smart, we call her Mrs. Eluish. And she was the same voice in our school. You know, Chadarim in the old times weren't as professional as they are today. And whenever we had a very hot-headed principal who could sometimes go overboard, and she was the one who protected us from him and protected him from himself, and she would keep everything calm. She was the one who took care of everybody. She was like the mommy of the school.
The only secretary in my day that ever got kicked out of the office.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. Zok to Heilige Gemara. Amar Rab Nosson. Huh?
I got slapped by Mr. Nussbaum.
You know, we can't mention names over here. So there's a recording here, and he already moved on. She would make things calm. Amar Rab Nosson. Amatraction. This Amatraction, which is the wall that was in between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim, and in its name, it tells us how thick it was. It was an Amma. The Chum never decided if it was considered like the Heichel or if it was considered like the Kodesh Kodeshim. Now, during the first Beis Hamikdash, it wasn't relevant because you couldn't stand there, you couldn't be there. But during the second Beis Hamikdash, that's why they had 2 paroiches, and one on the outer side, one on the inner side, and the reason for it is like Rashi tells us yesterday. Simply, you need to have a paroiches between the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodeshim. Since we don't know where the demarcation point is it between the Amatraction and the Heichel, or the Amatraction and the Kodesh Kodeshim? You need to. Rashi tells us where the word traction comes from. Let me see if we have it over here. Yeah, Rashi says over here, traction. Either lashon panim v'chutu. It has a lashon of inside and outside. Kach risi v'talmud Yerushalmi. V'rayla davar. It says Chasidim harishonim v'yimachnisen peireseim derech teraksemoin k'dei l'chayivim b'maiser. So you see it's an entrance area. It's the transition between inside and outside. In Yiddish we say nishtahin and nishtaher. So Zok to Gemara Matzka Floravina. My time. What is the reason? Ilemi mishum dechsiv. The habayis asher bana hamelach shloima lashem. The bayis, the mikdash that Shloima Melech built, was shishim amma orkoi. It was 60 amas long. So we know that the kodesh was 20 amas. It was 40 amas, and the kodesh kodeshim was 20 amas, which is a total of 60. The esrim rachboi and 20 amas wide was shloishim amma kemasoi and 30 amas high. Uchsivit says, "Barboim ba'ama habayis hu ha'heichel lefanai." The first 40 out of the 60 amas was the heichel. Uchsivit, it says in the pasuk, "V'lefnei hadavir," and inside the parochis, the vir Rashi says is the mechitza. Yeah, mechitza. Lefnei hadavir. It means inside this curtain, past the curtain, which means the base kachay kadeshim. Shulafnim and mechitza was another 20 amas long. The esrim amma roichev and 20 amas wide. The esrim amma kamasa. Now, right off the bat, a moment ago in the heichel, it said shloishim amma kamasa, and now here it says esrim amma kamasa. So I believe Tosfos says shloishim amma kamasa hainu kol habayis ad hagad. The roof of the building was 30 amas from the ground. However, we know that there was an attic over the Kodesh HaKodeshim. That attic was 10 amas high. So although the height of the building was 30 amas, the height of the Kodesh HaKodeshim was only 20 amas because of the attic that was above it, that took up space. Okay? The loyadin and amatraction, based on the interior dimension that we just recorded of the Beis Hamikdash, we don't know this amatraction. Imehani Esrim, is it part of the 20 amas that was the Kodesh of Kodeshim? Bimehani Abayim, because there is no extra added space mentioned in the psukim that we just quoted that include for an extra amma. So it must be that it took up space from the interior dimensions of 60 amas that we're talking about. Gemara, who said maybe it's not included in either one of those dimensions because maybe the Torah is only listing off the open space of the building, but it's not mentioning the thickness of the building, the thickness of the walls of the building. So it could be 60 plus the extra amatraxin, because amatraxin was not open space in the house of Shlomo in the first Beis Hamikdash. It was a block wall. Zoktamar Teda, the Chol Heichal, the Kachashav Koislim, Chashav Leilidei, because whenever we have a Mishnah listing the dimensions of the building, and it also gets into the thickness of the walls, well, you're going to see that there it's mentioned as additional space, which was on top of the 60 of the depth of the Heichal. Ditnan. Heichal Meya al Meya Barum Meya. The entire building, the entire Heichal building was 100 amas by 100 amas by 100 amas high. Now, I just want to mention that the reason why they couldn't make an amatraction of a wall is because if it's so high and it's only an amma thick at the bottom, it would topple. In order to make a very high building, the bottom of it would have to be wider. So you see clearly in those days, they didn't build with steel. Barzel was something that was never used in construction. I don't even know, does anybody know when they started using steel in construction? Even in America, the highest that they used to build a building, I read once, was 6 stories. That's why in Manhattan, those older residential buildings are 6 stories, because that they could build without steel. They could never extend a building more than 6 stories without steel, simply because the foundation would have to be so thick and the lower walls would have to be so thick to support the upper walls that there would be no room in the lower walls. But once you have steel, you have room. So the whole concept of skyscraper came to being once they started using steel. Okay? And elevators, that's right. But none. Ha'heichel meya al meya v'rum meya. So now let's figure out the dimensions. We're going to go through it item by item. So we're going to be walking through the heichel from east to west, which is the normal way you go through it, from the front to the back. So you walk in, and the first thing is the thickness of the Koisel Ulam was Chomesh. So the wall itself, it's a very thick wall, 5 amas, that's a 10-foot thick wall. Okay? The Ha'ulam Achas Esrei, the open space of the Ulam was 11. So 5 plus 11 is 16. Then you have the wall between the Ulam and the Heichel. Koisel Heichel, Sheish, it's 6 amas, which is 12 feet thick. So 11 plus 5 is 16, plus 6 is 22. The interior opening space of the Heichel is 40. So 22 plus 42 is, plus 40 is 62. So we're at 62 amas. The amma traction, so here you do calculate the amma traction. That's I think we're at 63. The chaf amma base kacha kadoshim, 63 plus 20 is 83. Then you have the rear wall of the Heichel, 83 kacha Heichel sheish. So 83 plus 6 is 89. The hata sheish, there were chambers, storage chambers, all around the Heichel. So in the back wall had a storage chamber as well, which was 6. So 89 and 6 is 95. The Koisel Asah Chomesh, and the rear wall of the Sah, which was the exterior wall of the Heichel building, was 5, which is 100. So you see that the length of the building was 100 amas, but you also see that in that picture, in that sectional, you see that there's a thickness of the amatraxin that's in addition to the 40 amas of the Heichel and the 20 amas at a base Kodesh HaKodesh. So it's not part of, but we still want. So the Gemara Shaila is no longer, was the amatraction part of the Kodesh or part of the Kodesh Kodshim? because in fact we've proven that it was neither. It was its own Amma. But the question that we want to know is, it's Kedusha, what is its status? Does it have the status of the Kodesh Kodshim, or does it have the status of the Heichal? And since they didn't know, they made it two curtains. And this is what Rabbi Yochanan said. Boy Yosef Ishutel. Yosef Ishutel asked, Udvir b'soich habayis mipnima hachen l'sitin sham es aroin b'ris Hashem. So this is the question that he had, how to understand this pasuk. So let's look at the pasuk inside, even though the side doesn't quote any more than the Gemara, but the side says Nakudas, so it's easier for me. It says, Udvir b'soich habayis. So Udvir, once again, Rashi told us, refers to the actual mechitza. Udvir b'soich habayis mipnima. It's on the inside. Heichen, it's prepared. L'sitin sham es haroin b'ris Hashem. So the question here merely is going to be, where do we put the comma in this pasuk? That is the shayla that we're going to have in a second. So basically, the pasuk shot in the pasuk is that they made a pareiches to separate the kodesh kodeshim, in which they placed the aron. So what is the pasuk saying? Udavir b'soich habayis mipnima hachin l'sitin sham. So let's see how Rashi explains that. So we see the different types, the different ways to learn this pasuk. Heichi kamakra. Me, I'm reading Hachi. I'm going to say the following: Udavir b'soich habayis. The pareiches was, or the separation was in the bayis. Mechitza asa. He made a mechitza shemafsekes b'soich habayis. He made a mechitza that's mafsek b'soich habayis. Mipnima hachin ulefnim me'oisa mechitza, and from the interior of that mechitza, hachin makom chalala, prepared this open space called the kodesh kodeshim. Bizminai lasei shames ha'aron, and prepared to keep the aron. If that's how you would read the pasuk, alma dvir gufei alav nikudushis pnimu, because you udvir b'soich habayis, the pareiches is in the house, and that's the separation. And mipnima, from the inside of that separation, that's hachan latitin shames ha'aron b'ris Hashem. So if you read the pasuk the way we just read it, it clearly states that the dvir, the pareiches, is not in the kodesh HaKodeshim, but from the inside of that partition, that's called the kodesh HaKodeshim. That's the first shot. Oidilma hachikamar udvir b'soich habayis mipnima. So the comma is after the mipnima. Oidilma hachim udvir b'soich habayis mipnima. The makam advir gufei mishal pnim hava. That the dvir itself was included in the pnim, in the kodesh HaKodeshim. So let's look at the pasuk again, just to get it clear. Udvir b'soich habayis, comma. Is that how you read it? Udvir b'soich habayis, there's a pareiches, comma, and mipnima, inside of the pareiches, hachan lititin shamas haroin b'ris Hashem, which means that the kodesh kodashim stops at the wall, and the wall is not part of the kodesh kodashim. Or you can read it, udvir b'soich habayis mipnima. The dvir is inside the base kodesh kodashim, which is hachan litin shamas haroin b'ris Hashem. So it's merely a question of where you put the comma.
So Yosy.
Yes.
Sorry. So the amma in between, that would also make a difference whether it's including the curtain or not including the curtain.
I don't understand.
The amma in between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kedoshim, right? We said there's an extra.
So originally there was a block wall there. Originally it was a block wall that was an amma thick.
So the amma is including. It was including.
But the second base, you couldn't make the block wall. So instead, they had a pareiches on either side of that amma.
Right. So the amma. So then, how do we account for the extra thickness of the curtain?
It was hollow in between. There was actually a corridor in between the two, according to the pasuk chart of how we learned
but the curtain itself,
the corridor,
right? Because we're saying it's exactly 100.
You want to know the thickness of the curtain? Yeah. Was that on what side of the line was that?
Right.
That's it's a very good point you're bringing up, and it's not irrelevant because the Tosfos actually specifically addresses it, because according to Rabbi Yosy, who we learned that there was no two curtains, there was only one curtain, he learned that the curtain was a amma thick. It was a very, very thick curtain. And Tosfos goes through the layering, except for the first sliver. Toshus learns that the whole, he brings a raya, the whole thickness of the curtain was within the Kodesh HaKodeshim. The curtain was considered Kodesh HaKodeshim.
Okay.
The art scroll has a diagram here and shows that the inner till the curtain, it was 20 amas from
Correct.
right. So it did not include the curtain, if that was the question.
But,
20
but-
amas did not include.
So the two curtains, let's say, had their own individual thickness. So that
Right.
thickness was not infringing on the space in the Kodesh or in the Kodesh Kodeshim. It was all within the Amma.
So it has to be within the Amma.
And between them there was an amma between the two
So
curtains.
that's impossible.
Like,
So
that's
that's
impossible. Then
impossible.
that would be over the 100.
The curtains had a thickness to them.
But if you said the curtain was an Amma itself, then it would be more than an
According to
Amma.
Yosy,
Because there was nothing in between. Okay.
Toshus brings down. Let's have a look. If we look at Toshus, you're bringing it up. Someone else take a quick look at it. The reason why we made two parechas is because it was a suffix. So Frek Toshus, Halavid parechas achash, Obi Amma. So why don't you just make one parechas that's an Amma thick and that solves your problem? You can't build a wall; it'll topple. But a parechas you can make. The linears of Toshus, the Mash Mahula Rabbanon, Pirish Tekra. The Rabbanon thought that the way you understand the pasuk of the Hivdila HaParechas Lachem Ben HaKodesh is that as follows: Shemitzad Chitzon Shel Parechas Yehei Kodesh, from the out to the exterior of the Parechas would be Kodesh, Umitchilas Oivu Lefnim, which means the actual thickness of the Parechas itself, Yiyakol Kodesh Kodeshim. So the Gemara understood that the thickness of the Parechas would be within the Kodesh Kodeshim, which is what you're asking. Where does the thickness of the Parechas? So the Toshus is learning that the Gemara held that the thickness of the Parechas would be within the Kodesh Kodeshim. You see, the Belzer Rebbe had a lot to talk about this Amatraction. So the Asach Raiderov. Yosy told me that the Friedrich Belzer Rebbe was very big into understanding how does Amatraction works. The reason why they couldn't make one Parechas that was an Amma thick, Ula Ukuma, Amakam Amatraction, and to place it in that area of Amatraction, because Dilma Kedushaso Kalachutz, if the space of the Amatraction is supposed to be Kalachutz, then the Nimsa de Metchilas Uvia Ulufnim Eina Kol Kodesh Kodshim. Now, if since they learned that the entire thickness of the Parechas had to be within the space of the Kodesh Kodeshim, then you couldn't put it over the Amatraction. So then you might ask, so how did they build a wall there in the first place in Mikdash? How did they know where it was? They put that wall there, and the problem is if the wall's supposed to be completely within the Kodesh Kodeshim, and we don't know what the status of the Amatraction is, how could that wall be there? There it was very specific in the Psukim exactly how it should be done. In the second base of Mikdash, it wasn't specific, and they had that suffix, they had to make two parechas. So Klor from Toshus, the thickness of the parechas itself had to be within the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So if we had two curtains, the inner curtain would have been on the inside line of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and the outside curtain would have been on the inside line of the Amatraction, because it's a suffix if that is the beginning of the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So thank you for bringing it up. You thought it was like a little dakat like a shaila. It's a big issue that you see the Rishonim talk about.
How again were they able to have a wall in the first place in the bush and not in the second?
Because it was the second mission was much higher, and the wall would topple. It didn't have steel. It was shorter. It wasn't. The second mission was much taller.
And then the second mission is when Yosy says that they had a curtain on Amma thick. How exactly do you understand how that curtain was made and supported? A curtain on Amma thick?
Yeah, and it was hung from the top. No, but they talk about these parechas were pretty big things. They were a big deal, this person. But it's still not as thick. It's still not as heavy as a concrete wall. Yeah. I'm not sure how they did all those things, but
I don't think there's such a thing in existence today as a cloth that's an amma thick.
That's right. I don't think
it must weigh a few tons then.
Yeah, the Gemara talks about. Remember, the Gemara talks about if you need 300 kahanim to carry it, and if it was a guzma or not. The Gemara talks about how many kahanim are needed. How many kahanim are needed? Oh, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest. We have the mechaber of Sefer Chaloim Yitzchak here. Oh, this is a special day for us. Okay.
Now, wait a second. This wall that didn't exist in the second Mitzvah because the second Mitzvah was too high, it had to be freestanding, meaning it couldn't be supported on either side.
It could, but it was 20 amos wide, right? Could be that wasn't enough support.
20 amos wide.
The wall wouldn't cross the whole heichel.
Right.
So it was 20 amos wide. Even with it up, it could be that wasn't steady enough.
So how did they make the outer wall of the basement if they went that high?
So I guess maybe that's a good point. Maybe you did have to be freestanding. Or on the one side, it couldn't be connected. No, on one side, it couldn't be connected because on one side, you have to get through. So it could be that's why it wouldn't be steady. But the outer walls were connected on all four sides. It's a good point. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara has over here. So the Gemara says, we have a shaila how to read the pasuk. Do you put the comma before the mipnima or after the mipnima? Is there a suffix as to how to read the pasuk, how to punctuate the pasuk? But Tanya, I'm going to show you that there's a list of sveikas of punctuation, a defined list, and this pasuk is not on the list. But Tanya, easy ben Yehuda Aimer, Chamesh Mikrayis B'Torah Ein Lehemecha. There's 5 sukkim in the Torah that we don't know where the comma goes, and the placement of the comma makes a big difference in the meaning of what the pasuk means. So there's se'es, and that is by Cain and Hevel. The Rashi tells us, it says in Tativ se'es, v'loshen slichahu. So is it in Tativ se'es? If you do tshuva se'es, I'll be moichel you. V'mlav lepesach hatas roivitz. Or is it in Tativ comma se'es? But if you continue on with your avera, lepesach hatas roivitz. So does se'es mean if you do tshuva se'es, you'll have a mechila, or does se'es mean you'll continue with the avera and the pesach hatzis right? So that's the first word, and we weren't sure if the comma is before it or after. Mishukadim. It says referring to the menorah. Arba gvim mishukadim kafteireu frachel. So the question is arba gvim mishukadim comma and then kafteireu frachel, which means the bechers on the menorah had the almonds on them, or no, there was arba gvim comma and mishukadim kafteireu frachel. That's another question that remains unresolved. Machar. It says v'tzeihi lachem ba'amalek machar. Does that mean you should fight with Amalek tomorrow? Or tzeihi lachem ba'amalek miyad? Or maybe tzeihi lachem ba'amalek, the comma goes after the word Amalek, before the word machar, and then machar anoichi nitzav. Today you don't need that feeling, Moshe said. The question is the war with Amalek supposed to start today, and my intervention starts tomorrow, or is the whole war supposed to start tomorrow? And then there's Ur. It says Ubertzainam Ikru Shar Ur Apam, referring to Shimon and Levi. So Shar Shal Shechem. So is it Ubertzainam Ikru Shar Ur, meaning with their Ratzon they uprooted the Shar of Shechem? And why is he referred to Ur? Because he's from Ur Knanim? Or is it Ubertzainam Ikru Shar Kama Ur Apam, which is how our Rebbe touched the faith. And then the last pasuk that it was a question where the comma goes is Hincha Shoichev Mavisecha. The come, I think Moshe Rabbeinu was talking about when he's going to pass away. So it says, Hin chashayev the come. The kan ramas l'tchisa mesim. So did he say, Hin chashayev v'kom, I'm going to die, and eventually I'm going to stand up, meaning Moshe Rabbeinu is being maramas tchisa mesim to Israel? Or is it Hin chashayev v'mesecha kama, the kama amazeh v'zona, and that's going to cause Eden to do aveiros, which is, I think, how we read it, Pashup Shot. But in fact, Rabbi Yosy, what was his name? Isi ben Yehuda said that these 5 psukim, it's not clear where to put the comma.
As far as the menorah is concerned, they had an actual menorah, so they knew it. They knew what it was until after the Churban Bayis, a number of years.
I hear. It's a good horror. So, Latanya, we learned now Yosef Ish Hutzal must have married off 6 daughters, because we're soon going to see that he went bankrupt 6 times. How do you know? Because it says, Tanya, who Yosef Ish Hutzal, who Yosef Abavli, who Isi ben Yehuda, who Isi ben Gur Aryeh, who Isi ben Gamliel, who Isi ben Mahalalel. So he must have married off 6 daughters, and probably each of these names were the names of his next Adam. So that's how he kept track of which account belonged to which person, and they didn't have computers or social insurance numbers in those days, so it was untrackable. Umashimoy, what was his real name that he never used at all? What did his father call him by his bris? Isi ben Akiva Shmoy. So I'll call upon them. You have a raya from here that there's only 5 places in the Torah where we don't know where to put the comma, and the pasuk that discusses where the Paraychus was is not one of those 5. So how could you say that the Chacham had a suffix in that pasuk? So in the Torah itself, in the Chamisha Chumsh Torah, you don't find it. But in the Nevi'im, you could find a discrepancy. In fact, Gemara with the Raisa Leka, or you can tell me in the Chumash itself, there are no other examples of how to place a comma. But Ika the boy Reb Chisda, what about the Shaila that Reb Chisda asked? It says, "Vayishlach es Nari b'nei Yisrael." This is by Kabbalah Torah. Moshe sent the Nari b'nei Yisrael. The Yalu Oilois Kavasim, the Yizbechu Zavachim Shalomim Purim. So the question is, where do you put the comma? Do you put the comma after Kvasim? So the Yalu Oilois Kvasim, as Oilois they brought Kvasim, the Yizbechu Zavachim Shalomim Purim, and the Shalomim that they brought were Purim. Is that how you read it? I don't know Idividi Purim, or it's Vayalu Oilois Kvasim, the Yizbechu Zavachim Shalomim Purim. Is it all one thing that they brought Purim for both? So this is very, very interesting how to read this, because this is not a question of where to put the comma. This actually is where to put the gershayim. So I should really pull the chumash out. But nafkamina lifts kan as a tam b'asnachta. Is there an asnachta there? Which in fact is it? That's how it is in our chumash. Idilma idi v'idi parim. Maybe they're both parim. The ein asnachta the tam oilish. There's no asnachta by the word oilish. Elatam gerish or gershayim yalo oilish kadesh yishchav shalachov. So let's look. When we look at the pasuk, it was very interesting when I looked at the pasuk yesterday, trying to see where it is. I believe it's in Mishpatim. Vav is Shmois Chavdalim. So let me just read the pasuk up. It was very, very interesting. Vav Chafei the Mishpatim. So it says over here. Vayishlach, so that is in the snachta. That's one shot. And then it says Vayizbechus vachim shalomim lashem parim. Oh, so it doesn't. I didn't understand it right. I didn't quote the pasuk right, because when I read the pasuk in the Gemara, I by mistake forgot that it doesn't say kfasim in the pasuk. So the question is Vayishlach nar b'nei Yisrael v'yalois. And that's an asnachta, and the oilos were kvasim, and the yizbechu zavachim shalom lashem parim, and the zavachim were parim. The shlomims were parim. That's one way to read it. And the yalo oilos with the asnachta means it was kvasim, or it's vayishlach stareb neshol v'yalu oilos, which is a gershayim, and that connects it to the no, I'm sorry, it wouldn't be. It would be asla gerish. It's not a gershayim. Rashi says, the Gershayim is the next word already. So the pasuk says Elatam Gerish, which would be an Asla Gerish. So it's Bayilu Oilois Vayizbechu. So that means it's all one, and that both the Oilois and the Shlomims were par. So that's the Shaila. We have the Kabbalah with the snapped over here.
Why would we assume it's kavasim? Is that what an oil generally is? Or?
I guess so.
The Zoin has a Kabbalah that Gershayim, the self Gershayim never connects to Gerish.
But how about an Asla Gerish? Maybe with an Asla Gerish you can connect. Okay. So tomorrow, Reb Chisda Misabkalei. Reb Chisda Taka had a suffix on that pasuk. How to read it? Isa ben Yehuda Pshitalei. Isa ben Yehuda, he knew for sure that it was a snach. Okay, Gevait. Hachitzoina, the outer paraychus, based on the way we learned it, there's 2 paraychus in. So hachitzoina, the outer paraychus, it wasn't the type of curtain like in Aaron Kodesh when you go to take the Aron, you slap the curtain and you open it. You didn't touch nothing. Keep your hands to yourself. It was folded back a little bit so you can get in without touching it. Rashi's perufa roisha kfula l'tzarachutz. Its edge was folded out, and the chezes beker shozov, and it was fastened with a golden hook. It remained open. So achitzoyna is a proof of an adorim. Upanemius, and the inner curtain was minatzofin. So the last curtain to get into the Beis Kodesh HaKodeshim, like we learned yesterday, was always open on the north side. Mahalach b'neim, so the kohen would go in on the left where the first curtain was open. He would turn to his right and start walking north in between the two pareichesim. And when he got to the north wall of the Heichal, to his left there was an opening in the curtain to get into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. We made a left turn. So when he got to the north wall of this corridor, he turns his head to the south. He turns around to the south, and he walks to his left. So I guess he walks in. He turns into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and he faces south. And Mahalach l'smoiloi ima paroiches. He walks with his left arm against the paroiches, and he walks south. Until he gets to where the Aron was. Aron, which means in between the two bottom. Aron, when he got to where the Aron was, so at that point he's going to turn and face the west and face the Aron. He'll put down his machta between the two bottom. And at that point, Tzavar es hakteris al gabi gechalim. He will put the ketteris on top of the gechalim. And the whole Kodesh HaKodeshim, or maybe even the whole Heichal, got full of Osham. And then Yotza, yeah.
I guess I missed this from before. The Aron is smack in the middle of the Kodesh Kodashim?
Yes.
Okay.
And it didn't take up space. So if it was 20 amas wide, there was 10 amas on either side of the Aron, even though because the Aron didn't take up any space. Okay. Yotza uvaloi.
Practical application for that miracle that there was 10 amas on either side.
I'm sure there is, although I can't tell you what it was, because we're not to make nisa for nothing. Yotza uvaloi, he walked out backwards. Yotza uvaloi, kederech knisasa. There's a child on the gears over here, so let's just look at the gimel. Yotza uvaloi, derech knisasa. He backed his way out the same way he went in, and then umispal tefillah katzar b'veisachitzon. In the heichal, he said a short tefillah. He didn't daven there too long, so the Olam shouldn't panic that he died. It was very common that the Kohen Gadol died there. So even if they don't hear a thump, but if he's not coming out, they're going to send him WhatsApps. What's going on, right? So because of that, he had to get out quickly, not to scare anybody.
Didn't he wear Rimonim?
I'm sorry?
Didn't he have Rimonim? Didn't the Rimonim?
No, he did not. No, he went in with the big Yelovim. We learned yesterday that he went in silence. If you're talking about the Mikdash Rishon, this story in the Mishnah can be accurate. We have a pareiches. There's no pareiches. So the Mishnah is telling us a story where there was a pareiches and there was an Aron, which makes no sense. Because the Mikdash Rishon, there was no pareiches. El b'Mikdash Sheni, we have Aron. There was no Aron. So how could the Mishnah tell me this story that occurred and there's a pareiches and an Aron? There was never a pareiches when there was an Aron. It's instructions of Ari, but he could never have done that because when there was never a pareiches and Aron at the same time. But Tanya, yes.
Sorry, in the first base of Mikdash, where there was a solid wall, so it just was an opening at the end, or how did it work?
Yeah, there was on the north. It didn't go all the way to the north.
So there was on the north side, there was an opening.
Correct.
Okay.
Tanya, Nigna's Aron, when the Aron was hidden, Nigna's Imai, what was hidden with it? Tzinsenes Hamon, a little container of Mon, as well as Tzlucha Shem and Mishcha, a little container of Shem and Mishcha. Umakaloi shel Aaron ushkadeo precha. The makal of Aaron with its almonds and blossoms on it. The argish shagru pelishtim doirin lekei Yisrael, and the box that the pelishtim sent a present to the Rebbeinu Shalom when they decided that they didn't want to kidnap the Aaron anymore. They thought it would be a good idea to send it back and not destroy the entire population. So they sent a gift in a box, and that box was also kept together with the Aaron, and it was hidden there. Shenemar tells in the pasuk the Klei Azov as Hashivoisim Loi Osham, the Klei Azov that the Pelishtim gave back as an Osham, meaning to admit guilt and to get a kapara. So Simu Ba'argez Mitzida, you put in the box besides the Aaron. Ushlachtem Oisoi V'halach. So this was the Pelishtim, the Pelishti clergy giving instruction to the Pelishtim to send us back and how they were going to send it back. Correct the Gemara, and who was the person who hid all these things, all these treasures. So Yosio Gonzai, Yosio Amelach hid him. Ma Rosh Gonzai, what possessed him that he saw the need to hide these things before the Churban? Ra Shakasav, he saw it said in the Pasuk, Yoilach Hashem Oischa Vesmalkech Asher Tokim Alecha Imcha. I'm sorry, I didn't read it. Yoilach Hashem Oischa Vesmalkech Asher Tokim Alecha. He saw a Pasuk that says that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to send you and your Melech and Golas. So that means we're going to be gone. Who's going to provide you proper respect and security and care for these items? Therefore, Amud V'Gonzoi Shenemar V'Yomer LeLeviim HaMavinim L'Chol Yisrael HaKadoshim Lashem. He told the Leviim, those who were in the inner circle, who he could trust, Tenuas Aroina Kodesh Bebayis Asher Bana Shleima Ben David. Now, the Beis HaMikdash is an operation, and the Aron was where it belonged. So, what type of instructions is he giving them? Put the Aron in the Beis HaMikdash that Shlomo built. That's exactly where it is. And then he said, Ein lechem masa b'kaseh. You shouldn't carry it. Ata ivdu Hashem lekechem esamay shall go do the proper avodah. So the problem is, it was already in the Beis HaMikdash. So we learned that it must be that he was telling them to hide it within the Beis HaMikdash, and there's a chamber underneath somewhere that it's hidden. Now that tells us that he hid the Aron. Where do you know that all these other accessories were hidden? Osya Shama Shama, and Rashi says it says by the Aron Asher Shama, and by the Tzinsenes Hamon it says V'sein Shama. So that's how we know that the Tzinsenes Hamon was also hidden. V'osya Doiros by Tzinsenes Hamon it says L'Doiros Seichem, and by the Tluchas of Shamin HaMishcha it says Doiros there as well. So that's how you know that the Shamin HaMishcha was hidden. And then it says Mishmeres, which Rashi tells us by the Makalish Iron, it says Mishmeres, and by Tzinsenes Hamon it says Mishmeres. So that's how we know that was hidden as well. Zok Gemara, you're right. You're right. You don't have an Aron and the Parechus at the same time. So the Mikdash Sheni, we're talking about the Mikdash Sheni. The question is, Uma Hegia La'aron. What does it mean in the Mishnah when the Tana says the Kohen Gadol got to the Aron? It means Makam Aron. Means the Evan Shasiya, but the place where the Aron was normally placed. Correct the Gemara, how could you say that? The Tana is very descriptive and says you're not putting it by the Aron, you're putting it in between the two Badim, which would indicate that there was actually an Aron there with Badim. The Gemara, the Kohen Gadol placed the Machta where he figures the Shnei Badim would have been, that's where he put it. Zok the Gemara back. He piled up the Ketores al Gabi Chalim. Now let's say, just for instance, you have a machta that's 20 inches deep. I don't know how deep it was, but it's 20 inches deep. So if he's standing in front of the machta extends in front of him 20 inches away. Now, now we're getting into barbecue season. Could be the Olam already barbecue this season. So let me ask you a question. Where is it easier to manage the steak? Where it's on the grill closest to you, or if you have to reach over a steak on the grill to reach the back steak? When you reach the back steak, you're going to singe your hair on your arm because there's fire coming up in the front of the grill if you have to reach to the back of the grill. So that problem existed for the Kohen Gadol as well. So the question is, how did the Kohen Gadol put the Ketores on the grill? Tatznan, command Amr Tzoivra, we learned as follows. Look, the command was Tzoivra. Tani Chada, Tzoivra, Peniba Sheu Chutzaloi. There's one mandam who learned that he reached over to the back of the grill and started putting the Ketores and then moved towards himself, because the moment he puts Ketores on the grill, that Ketores is going to go up in smoke and he's going to burn his hand. So if he starts far away and comes closer to him, he's never putting his hand over the fire. But Tanya Idich, the opposite, he started by him and he reached over, which causes him a problem. He can get burnt. Amar Abai tonight, it's actually tonight. It makes more sense to say that he started deeper in and then he came out. That now we learned, they teach him, be careful, don't start right in front of you and lean over and move over, because the moment you put the tires on the coal, it's going to fly up and flare up in a flame, and then you got to reach over that flame to put the tires further back. And I just want to point out, there's a very interesting expression here. it says not only was the maklish shel Aaron hidden, but it's giving us a lot of information. Ushkedea ufrachel. It's almonds and it's blossoms, which is a little bit mudna. So if you look at the Tosfos Yeshanim, Tosfos speaks of something very interesting. It says over here, maklish line ushkedea ufrachel tameani freik the Tosfos Yeshanim. Lama masker ufrachel. Why in the world do I need to know that they were flowers and blossoms? Well, I gomal shkedim. It had fully grown fruits. It had almonds. Zokt the Tosfos Yeshanim v'nira ki mixas haprochem nisharu. Hashem made it that not only did the fruits remain, but even the blossoms remain. The flowers before the blossoms remain. So they gomu shkedim v'nisharu prochem, which is a little bit of mud nazach. Why was that necessary? Now this is coming up. It's in Parshas Korach. So I just want to share with you a chaloi mas Yosef. That's the sefer that I never wrote. So I'm going to share with you a chaloi mas Yosef. I'm sorry. No, he's chaloi mas Yosef. It's a different sefer. So it says in the pasuk after they put their maklos into the base kodesh of kodeshim, it says vayimi machras vayovei Moshe al oil ha'edus v'hine. The next day, this is what he saw on the tree. Iron stick grew. Parach means it grew. It flowered. It sits. It blossomed. Why didn't they just say grew? I need to know the whole process. So the Rishonim talk about this. So let me find the Rishonim. So the first one we have the Rashbam speaks about it. The Rashbam says something interesting. Nira lefi hapshat kishaitziu hamata umatzai shaparach v'lo yosa. He wants to say that when they pulled the mata out, it only had flowered. It did not have shkedim. K'dichsev v'hinei parach mata iron. Aval achar came v'yotzet tzitz le'nei kol Yisrael. So he took his stick out, and all it had was flowers. And then in front of everybody's eyes, they saw the stick grow blossoms. And then in front of their eyes, they saw the time lapse of it become shkedim. She'ilu kain haya ha'inyin tchila hine lehaisa nira lo yafricha v'lo yinitza. That if when he took it out, it already had shkedim on it, so they wouldn't have seen the growing, they wouldn't have seen the blossoming. And it grew. It should have just said it grew shkedim. Why does it have to say they saw all this? So it must be Dr. Rashbam that this happened in front of their very eyes. However, the Das Kedim has actually a different approach. The Das Kedim says something different. Das Kedim says, there were two types of growth. It flowered, and those flowers remained on the tree. They never fell off, like in a normal growth, where the flower leads to a blossom, which leads to a fruit. But at the end, when the fruits are there, there's no more blossom, and there is no more flower. But it also grew and progressed. So it seems like they were all there. Yuma. So he brings a raya from our Gemara in Yuma, where the Torah our Gemara tells us that when they hid the stick, it had on it ufrachel ushkedeh. So the Das Kedim was bringing a raya from our Gemara. We parak makam shenahagu the masak alosh and dvarim sheniknazu v'yesh oimrim af maklos l'aron shkedeh v'chel niknazu, which is our Gemara. Nechlal the prochem hayu v'amdu la'olam. Which means it was a mamash hanei. So what was the time that it grew almonds? All of the stages of growth were visible on that tree. Now the question is, why do you need such a nice for? So to the Chaloi mas Yosef wanted a tanya, very simple. Here Korach felt that he needed to be the Kohen Gadol, and since that had to be, he used means that were maybe less than desirable to get to his end. But he justified it because since the end is so important, we can justify means that maybe aren't 100% kosher. Here, the Torah is trying to show us that the process is just as important. you have to see the blossom, you have to see the flower, and then there has to be the blossom, then there has to be the skating. The Torah is trying to perpetuate that not only is the end important, but the means to the end, every step along the way, when it comes to Yiddishkeit, has to be done in 100% kosher fashion. That's what the Chalem Yosy wanted to time. And with that,
Have a kasha on the Chalemus Yosef.
okay, I'll wake up, I'll sober up.
It was already established when Korach is already dead, by the way, at this point.
He's dead, that's right.
Yeah. So the
He's
issue
a stick
was
in the mud.
so the issue was no longer who should be the Kohen Gadol. That was established. This test was to see who the Levium should be, not the Kohuna, but the Levium.
Okay.
So Aaron represented Shevet Levi.
But it wasn't just to identify. Then it could have a one-time burial. It was something that would be a lasting monument to remind everybody that this is how things have to be.
To who the Levium should be. Right. They were challenged by Shevet Reuven. The Reuven wanted to be the Levim because he was the Bechor, or the Bechorim wanted to be the Levim, right? But so this test established who should be helping the Kohanim as the Levim.
But for that, the Shkedim would have been enough. Why did you have to see why did you need to see?
I don't know.
It must be to tell them, no matter who's right and who's wrong, everything has to be done up here the proper way.
Okay.
That's what I want to time.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true. That's what I want to time. Okay, gewaltig. But it's geschmack the Das Kanan in Parshas Korach refers to our Gemara here on the basement base. Okay, have a wonderful day.
Yeah.
Shkoyach.